having a lot of power or influence in the area. Okay, so here is all of your questions for that section, or the section coming up. What was the main curriculum of cathedral schools? What did discovering the works of Aristotle lead to? Who was the most famous scholastic theologian? What other religions can you compare Christians' devotion to, the saints to? Who was the most popular saint during the High Middle Ages? What did people in the High Middle Ages believe about relics? What did Dominicans and Franciscans belong to? What did Dominican and Franciscans do? And what were the two popular heresies during the High Middle Ages? So obviously this is going to be about the Christian role that different people played during this time, looking also at what Christianity did in terms of influencing various ideas and areas outside of the church. So the first thing that we're going to look at is schools, universities, and scholastic theology. So in the early Middle Ages, really the only people who learned or had any sort of knowledge were the people who were in these monasteries, who were a part of the church. They were the ones who knew how to read, who knew how to write in the early Middle Ages. But as we move, out of the early Middle Ages into the High Middle Ages, um, we see that the church begins to offer, this knowledge to everybody if you went to school. And these cathedral schools are one of the things that they offered. And it was pretty much a formula of curriculum, instruction in liberal arts. So you were going to learn about history, you were going to learn about philosophy, you were going to learn about English. Those are the liberal arts. After that, you had the opportunity of attending universities, which was high quality instruction that you could earn an academic degree in, and you could get that license to teach. So this is again where you see the development of this idea of a university that we still have today, and pretty much still plays the same role as it did hundreds of years ago. St. Thomas Aquinas, he was a well-known theologian. He was able to harmonize the ideas of Aristotle with Christianity, and he created this synthesis of reason and faith. He was able to say, yes, Aristotle has all these philosophies, but that doesn't mean they do not connect to what, Christianity teaches us. And he was able to bring these two ideas together and show how they can merge and they can exist as one. We also see popular religion, the sacraments, which were holy rituals that brought spiritual blessings to the people that observed them, and the people felt that it would protect them from death and advance the worldly interests. So at this time, the people, who receive sacraments, who believe in these devotions to saints and stuff like that, they took it to another level than what it is today. They felt, if I do this, then I'm going to be protected, then I'm good. And if I believe in the saints and if I have their relics, then, I'm also good in that way too. So, devotion to saints, we see human beings who had led such excellent lives that God held them in a great regard. One of the saints that everybody always prayed to during this time was the Virgin Mary. They believed that relics retained powers of them. So, like relics meaning if a saint died, or they considered somebody a saint and then they died, they would take like the bones of these people or like hair of these people, and that would be a relic. And they would think that, oh, because I have this bone or I have this hair from them, then I'm going to be more protected than somebody who doesn't. Another thing that the church did, was we see a pilgrimage to Jerusalem happening more often, saying, that you had to take this spiritual journey, and if you were able to, especially the wealthy, they would take the spiritual journey to reach that higher connection. Reform movements and popular heresies that existed. In terms of reform movements, we see the Dominicans and the Franciscans started, obviously, St. Dominic, St. Francis, and these were mendicants. Mendicants are beggars, and their job was pretty much, you're giving up all your worldly possessions and you're relying on the charity and kindness of others. So they would beg for food, and others' needs worked zealously. So They were hard workers and at the same time, again, reliant on others. Even though we see such a large role that was being played by the church, by the Roman Catholic Church in this area, there were other smaller religions and beliefs that did exist that were contrary to that. We see that with popular heresy. Some of those religions that went against what the church was doing were the Waldensians, the Bogomils, and the Cathars. And again, like I said, pretty much against Christendom. If it wasn't the doctrine, then it was how they were preaching Christianity. And they did have followers, obviously not even close to the amount that Christians did, that Catholics did, but they were there and they did exist. So the medieval expansion of Europe, the Atlantic and the Baltic colonization. So like I said, the High Middle Ages are this time where pretty much things are going a lot better for the West, for Europe. Things are going a lot better than what they were after the fall of the Roman Empire. And as things are progressing, there is more expansion of land. An example would be Vinland and the island, which is the island of North Atlantic Ocean. And it was discovered by Leif Erikson, who was a Scandinavian seafarer. Another example is this Christianity in Scandinavia. The kings of Denmark and Norway, they converted to Christianity. And they solidified the Roman Catholic Church in Scandinavian life. So again, by them coming into power, it's just reaffirming that power that the church has as they convert. And then we also see crusading orders of the Baltic expansion, where in the Baltic era, Christians formed hybrid military orders like the Templars, the Knights Tudor, and stuff like that. The Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and they would take religious vows of devotion to fight against the Muslims. So just again, as these knights are, fighting against Muslims, as we see people take over areas and convert to Christianity, that just reaffirms the amount of power that the church is gaining at this time, that it's gaining, and it has. And then we'll also see that power move to the Reconquista, or the reconquest of Sicily and Spain. In terms of Sicily, at first it was conquered by the Muslims in the 9th century. By the 11th century, the Norman Christians will come in and take it back. The Norman Christians that helped against Frederick Barbarossa, these are the same Norman Christians that are going to help take back the area of Sicily. So the Muslims will be able to maintain for a period of time, and they'll try to keep themselves together. But eventually, because the Normans come in, they're not going to be able to. They will, however, while they're there in Sicily, they'll provide Christians with Aristotle's philosophies, and they will either leave Sicily or they will convert to Christianity. That was your option. You leave or you convert. There was no other option. So the Reconquista of Spain, which means the reconquest of Spain, began in the early 11th century. So we see political, economic, and demographic strength explain how Christian Europe was able to reconquest Sicily and Spain. So pretty much the government became Christian. The trading was predominantly by Christians. Most of the land owned by Christians. So it became easy for Christianity to say, hey, you know what? Or the church to say, hey, you know what? This area is predominantly us. So why can we not take it over? So Christianity regarded Muslims as the opposition to Christianity and encouraged military campaigns. This idea of, if you're not with us, you're against us. If you're not Christian, then you're not there to support us. So questions: who reconquered Sicily? What group of people were the Europeans reconquering? Continuing on, the Crusades, which were the Holy Wars. So it refers to the expedition or of the Roman Catholic Christians to recapture Palestine, Jerusalem from the Muslims. So keep in mind, these areas are taken over by the Muslim Turks, those nomadic invaders that came in and conquered. This is who has Jerusalem. This is who has Palestine. And the Catholic Church feels like, no, it's ours. It's not the Muslims. It's our land. So they will send the crusades. They will send the knights to have these crusades, the holy wars. So Urban II, who's the Pope at this time, he's the one that starts the Crusades, and he says that the Turks threatening the east, that they're threatening the eastern border of Christendom, and it's the job of anybody who's Catholic, to go and fight against them, so we can keep our borders as Christians. So Urban says to secure the border and to go further and recapture Jerusalem. So not only are you going to secure our border, but you're going to go further and you're going to get that holy site. So in the First Crusades, the French and Normans will militarize, and they'll go back and forth between victories. Sometimes the victory would be for the Christians, sometimes the victory would be for the Muslims. Muslim Saladin, he will capture Jerusalem in 1187. Later, we'll see the later Crusades, which occur in the 13th century, and the Christians will attempt 5 other crusades, but to no avail, meaning that they're not going to be successful. And a part of that is just geography. Okay, you have to think that they're all coming from further areas, so whatever they have in terms of weaponry is what they have. Whereas the Muslims, they're closer in proximity, and they're closer to receiving weapons and any sort of supplies they need. So these crusades, obviously, we see they go from the 11th to the 13th century. So from 1000 to the 1200s, they, continually on and off have these battles between Christians and Muslims. And yes, it was, because the Christians felt the Muslims were threatening and the Muslims felt the Christians were threatening. And there were consequences to this besides, that many people died. The Crusades had social, economic, and commercial and cultural consequences. During these Crusades, there was trade that still existed. Trade of ideas, trade of diffusion, because again, it wasn't a consistent crusade. It wasn't totally, we're always fighting. It was on again, off again. So during these times, we see trade and exchange of ideas and technologies would grow between the Muslims and the Christians. So these are actually positive consequences that the Crusades brought. Some examples of these diffusions were those ideas of Aristotle that existed. We see Islamic science and astronomy, that's picked up by the Europeans. Arabic numerals are picked up by the Europeans. Paper production. So it's almost like the West is, catching up to everything that the East has already known about. And this is going to happen for the West rapidly. And not only are they going to catch up at one point, they're going to surpass everybody else because they will just invent more. They'll, want to explore more. And this is going to lead into the next time period. So again, the Crusades are going to reintegrate Europe into the larger economy through this trade, through these diffusion of ideas and technology and inventions. All right, so your last question. Who was Urban II and what did he promote? What did the First Crusade show? What were the consequences of the Crusades? All right, so I know was a two-parter here. We talked a lot. I talked a lot. And just keep in mind the major points is that, these are the High Middle Ages. So this is actually a time of revival for Europe. And it's really going to be the change that Europe needs. And they're going to run with this. They're going to run with their revival. And it's going to lead into the Renaissance, into the Reformation, into their exploration of the world. So them coming out of this time period was really important for them becoming the dominant area of the world in a later, in later centuries. All right, so go ahead and answer the rest of your questions, and I'll see you next time.